Hello everyone. In this presentation, we will see about the calibration of equipments. So the main objective of this presentation is to make aware about the calibration process which is to be carried out in concern with measuring instruments which are widely used in engineering field. So let us see what is meant by calibration. The set of operations which established under specific conditions. The relationship between values indicated by measuring instruments or measuring system, or the value represented by a material measure or a reference material, and the corresponding value of a quality realized by a reference standard. So various standards are used for the calibration process. So we will see which are the agencies about these standards, where they are found. So we will see in coming slides. So here the details of calibration labs is shown here in this figure. So various labs which are in India, in UK or USA are shown here, and details about the labs which are found in India is shown here. So here NPL, that is National Physical Laboratory India, is there, where the ERTL, that is Electronics Regional Test Laboratories, are shown here. That is, the regions are there are east, west, north, south, and at some other places. Similarly, some electronics test and development centers are also there in India. So these are the laboratories which are used for the calibration purpose in India. Similarly, there are also some laboratories in UK and USA. So depending our requirement, we can calibrate the measuring equipments in India or abroad. So here, why the measuring instruments requires the calibration? So here the need of calibration is given. So the main objectives of calibration services are to maintain quality control and quality assurance in production. Then next is to comply with requirements of global trade and to meet the requirement of ISO guidelines. Also to promote international recognition. And last one is for tracking back measurement results to national standards. That is, the measurements which are taken in the past can be compared with the national standards. So why this calibration is required to be done? So what are the benefits behind that? So the first benefit is it fulfills the requirement of traceability to national and international standards like ISO 9000, ISO 14000, etc. There are various standards, which is national or international standards, available for the calibration of various measuring equipments or instruments. Depending on the type of instrument, use of instrument, and some other things, we can select the standard, or we can follow the standard to calibrate that particular instrument. The next benefit is as a proof that the instrument is working. So when we go for the calibration, first that the instrument should be in working condition. Otherwise, the calibration cannot be happen. So when we say the particular instrument is calibrated, means we are assuring its working condition. And next is confidence in using the instrument. So when we are going to measure some parameters, whether they are electrical, mechanical or civil measurements, etc. So we have to trust on the instrument that the measurements or reading given by that instrument is the accurate measurement. So if the instrument is calibrated, so we can confidently say that the reading shown by the instrument is okay or clear or true measurement, guys. Then next is traceability to national measurement standard. So when we calibrate the instrument, we can trace that measurements with the standard. Then interchangeability, that is also one of the benefits of the calibration. Then next one is reduced rejection failure rate, thus higher return. So when we get the accurate results, then if the results or readings are not up to the mark, then we can go for the corrective action. So taking the measurements time to time with calibrated instruments, we can reduce the rejection so that the failure rate can be reduced, and so the benefit will be more. The next benefit is improved product and service quality leading to satisfied customers. Also power saving and cost saving, and one of the most important benefit is the safety. When instrument is calibrated, it also assures the safety to the operating person. Now here, what are the basic requirements for calibration? Now, the basic requirements for the calibration are reference or calibration standards and other instruments and equipment. So when we calibrate any equipment or instrument, we have to refer some standard value, or we have to compare the reading of that instrument with other calibrated instrument. And by comparing the result of both those instruments, we can calibrate the equipment or instrument. Then next is controlled environment conditions. Now in case of various engineering field, the measurements of various parameters also depends on the environmental conditions. So when we calibrate the equipment or instrument, we have to maintain some basic conditions so that the instrument can be calibrated properly. And next is competence of calibration lab personnel. The person who is going to calibrate should be competent for that procedure. And next basic requirement is traceability of reference and calibration standards. And the last but not the least is the documentation. And this is very important when we calibrate any instrument or equipment. So from this documentation, we can refer the past values for the future references. Now, what is meant by reference or calibration standard? So generally, calibration standards are categorized as passive or active standards. Now, which are the passive standards? Now, passive standard is one that either does not require or rely on operating power from external source, means the passive standards that are not required external power source. And second, it does not contain elements within its circuitry that are responsible for amplification of the signal. For example, decade resistance, current shunt, RTD, thermocouple, etc. So, next is the active standard. An active instrument, on the other hand, does rely on the power circuitry which processes applied signal in some manner or other. For example, digital multimeter or a multifunctional calibrator, etc. Now, other than these two categories, that is passive standards and active standards, these standards can be classified as primary level standards, secondary level standard, and tertiary or working level standards. So now how to control, or why the control on environmental condition is required while we make the calibration. So in order to derive best accuracy and meaningful calibration result, it is important to control environmental conditions in which measurements are made. And control and monitoring of following factors should be maintained as recommended by manufacturer of standard or instrument. So, we have to maintain the temperature which is recommended by manufacturer of that instrument or standard. Then we have to maintain relative humidity also. We have to maintain illumination level while calibration process is going on. We have also to maintain acoustic level. Then shock and vibration should be adequately maintained. Power supply regulation, that is, there should not be variation in power supply while we are conducting the calibration of any equipment or instrument. Then temperature gradient. Then proper earthing should be there for the instruments where it is necessary while doing the calibration. Now the last but not least is the documentation. When we do the calibration of any equipment or instrument, so documentation is the very important part. So in any quality system, documentation has very important role, and therefore proper care shall be taken for documenting. So in documentation, we have to mention the calibration procedure or methods which is followed during the calibration of particular equipment or instrument. Then we have to mention calibration results also, that is recorded data. Then we have to prepare calibration report and calibration certificate, and this is to be submitted to the customer who ordered for the calibration. Then a full explanation of documentation, one may find the guidelines of ISO 9000 or ISO 10012-1 documents. And the calibration report must address answer for who, means for who the calibration is done, what is calibration results, or what is the data obtained from the calibration, when this procedure is conducted or carried out, that is calibration date, where, that is location and address where the calibration is done, how calibration procedure is done or which method is followed for the calibration of particular equipment or instrument, and what are the limitations or decisions shall also be reflected. So each and every procedure or method has some limitations, so that we have to also mention when we submit the documentation report or calibration certificate or calibration report to the customer or owner. So here we understand about the calibration of various measuring instruments. So thank you for watching the video. Thank you. Thanks.